I was in a new city. I had left the last place that I had been living in a hurry. I owed money to some very bad people. They were the type who skipped writing to tell you your account was being handed over to a debt collection agency. They went straight to sending men around to break your legs. With all my bones intact and confident that they had no way of finding me, I had a spring in my step as I left the coach station. I had a few bucks in my pocket, enough to buy a beer. After that, I would do what I had done my whole life. I would see where chance took me. I crossed the road, making my way to a bar that I had spotted on the corner. Only as I was heading for the door, a stranger stepped in my way, a big guy in a suit. He had a scar on one cheek and silver cufflinks. I had met this type before, usually just after they would kick my front door in. "Got a proposal for you, bud," he said. "A way for you to make some easy money. You interested?" "Nah," I growled and tried to move past him, but he stood his ground and said, "There's a coin on the ground over there. All you need to do is pick it up and scan the QR code that you'll find on the head side into this phone, and then you'll see what you've won." The phone that he was holding out in front of me was slim and sleek. My phone was years old and all out of credit. I thought quickly. I had no idea what this fellow's scam was, but I decided that I was going to take the phone, and as soon as I could, I would sell it on the street. I put on my best poker face and said, "Sure." He handed me the phone and lumbered away. "Sucker," I muttered under my breath and was about to head out into the bar when I noticed that there was a coin lying on the sidewalk. It was 6 easy paces to my left. And why not, I thought, and strolled over. I picked the coin up and turned it to my fingers. There was a QR code stuck over the dead president's face, as scarred cheek had said there would be. Intrigued, I turned the phone on. No passcode was required, and it went straight to a screen where a banking app was open. The account showed a balance of 0. I held the screen over the QR code, and the balance changed from 0 to $100. The hand that I was holding the phone with began to shake a little. I mean, that was a lot of money for me in my current position, but only if it was real. I'm telling myself not to get carried away because that was what Marks did in a con trick, so I went into the bar. It was late afternoon, and it was too early for the office workers celebrating the end of another stressful day, and too late for the lunchtime crowd, so the place was relatively quiet. I took a seat at the bar and I ordered a beer. I told the barman that I was just having the one and I wanted to pay now. He held up the card machine. Now, I had no idea how many times this type of transaction happened every day across the country. Whether it was thousands or millions of times, it was a blink and you miss it moment. But I could feel a bead of sweat on my forehead as I held the phone over the reader to make a contactless payment. I was convinced that it would not work. And then there was the quiet beep and the words displayed saying the payment had been authorized. I looked at the phone. The balance was down by the price of a beer, which meant that the money was real. I took a long drink, savoring the beer, and it tasted fantastic. I was so caught up in the moment that I didn't notice that I had been joined at the bar by a familiar face. His scar was a sharp, pale line, his cufflinks shone under the lights of the bar. He smiled at me. His teeth needed a dental intervention. "I'm glad to see you took the coin. It's the opening move in a game that the company that I work for runs. It's simple enough. Complete a task that you are given and you get money credited to the account. Fail and you get nothing. You also have to keep the phone on you at all times, and you can't tell anyone you're in the game. There will be consequences if you break these rules. What do you say, bud? You in or you out?" At times, my life had felt like a freak show. What was one more lousy episode? I figured. I say that you people need to get out more, I told him with a cynical grin. But sure, if there's more easy money on offer, I'll take it from you. I'm thoughtful that way. His smile grew wider. It wasn't a smile that gave me a warm glow inside or made me think the world was not such a bad place after all. It was a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. He was still smiling as he lowered himself off the stool and lumbered out the bar. "Don't forget to write," I called out after him and turned back to my beer. I was thinking of ordering another one, maybe something to eat as well. I liked the bar, it felt comforting and safe. But only my phone pinged. There was a message on the screen. It read, "There's a dollar bill on the floor on the other side of the bar. Pick it up and scan it." I looked over the bar and sure enough, there was a bill on the floor just below the till. I figured that Scar Cheek must have thrown the bill over when he had first taken a seat and it was within easy reach. I looked along the bar. The barman was at the other end, flirting with a couple of women. From the way they were laughing, they were falling for his charm, which it seemed to leave the coast clear for me. There was an old-fashioned hatch in the bar. I opened it, stepped through to the server's side, leaned over and picked up the bill. There was a QR code stuck onto one side. Like taking candy from a baby, I thought, and I scanned it. The balance shot up to $1,000, minus the earlier price for the beer. I was staring at the figure on the screen and grinning from ear to ear when the barman spotted me and started shouting. He probably thought that I was trying to steal from the till or take one of the credit cards propped up next to it. I ran out of the bar before the barman could do anything to stop me, and then I headed down a side street, while he stood in the doorway of the bar yelling that he was going to call the cops. I kept moving until I felt that I was a safe enough distance away from the bar to relax. I leaned back against a wall and started to think about what I could do with my $1,000. I would have a few more drinks for a start, and then I would buy some new clothes. I was wondering what else I could enjoy when a new message appeared on the screen. I didn't mind the interruption at all. It meant more easy money was heading my way. The message read, "There's a man in a pinstriped suit exiting an office block opposite of you. There's a QR code on a document that we have covertly placed in his briefcase. You know what to do." My first thought was that the company running the game must have known my location through a tracker on the phone. My second thought was, bring it on. I glanced up and sure enough there was a business type wearing a fancy pinstriped suit, stepping out onto the sidewalk on the other side of the road. He carried an expensive-looking brown leather briefcase. I set off towards him. The only way that I could get to the QR code was to physically take the briefcase off him. I told myself that this wasn't theft, because as soon as I had found the QR code and scanned it, I would abandon the briefcase with the rest of his contents untouched. I was able to break into a sprint and grab the briefcase, when a man that I had never seen before ran at pinstripe from the opposite direction, and then he pulled the briefcase out of the businessman's hand. Pinstripe cried out in shock. I looked down as the briefcase snatcher sprinted past me and veered into an alley. It occurred to me that he could be playing the game as well, and he had been given the same task as me, or more likely he was just a thief. Either way, I didn't care. I wanted the money, that was all that mattered. I ran after the briefcase snatcher, my feet pounding the sidewalk and then the dark, filthy alley. I could hear glass breaking under my feet. I gulped in air, tried to ignore the pain burning in my chest, and I clenched my fists, because I could see the briefcase snatcher. He was standing in the shadows, and the briefcase was open. I took another sharp intake of breath and ran straight at him. He was a stocky guy and I knew that I couldn't do him any serious damage, but I was hoping my body weight and momentum would be enough to take him out. We collided at speed and I did send him flying. I landed on top of him, tore the briefcase from his hands and scrambled back to my feet before he could catch his breath. I set off running again. I made it out of the far side of the alley and, still with only one thing on my mind, started to rifle through the contents of the briefcase. There were brochures and a notebook computer and a slip of plain paper with a QR code on it. I scanned it and fist-pumped the air in triumph. The balance was now almost $10,000. Laughing to myself and coughing and holding a hand to my chest where the pain still burned, I dropped the briefcase onto the sidewalk and I jogged away. I wasn't rich, not by most people's standards, but when you've been threatened in the past over a debt of a couple of grand, this felt big. I was over the moon, and famished. I called into a deli and for the first time in a long time, I didn't double-check the price of anything before ordering. After paying using the phone, I found a bench in a small square to sit on while I enjoyed the food. It was a warm, early summer day and the food tasted so good. This was how life should be lived, I thought. Not running scared, not scrambling around for money, but sitting back and enjoying the sun on my face. I grinned and my phone pinged. As I took the phone out of my pocket, the only question that I had was, how much money would I make this time? The message read, "You'll see a grocery store when you leave the square. One of the discounted cans of cat food on display has a QR code next to the regular barcode." Wow, I thought as I jumped to my feet. This is getting easier. I strolled into the store alongside the shoppers and made my way up and down the aisles looking for the display that promised small savings for everyone else and a big payout for me. I found the discounted cat food at the end of the last aisle that I tried. The cans were stacked high. I picked one up from the top of the stack. There is a picture of a happy-looking cat on the label alongside some nonsense about vitamins and minerals and supercharged felines. The top of the can had a best before date on it, and there was a barcode on the underside, but nothing else on the can that I was holding. I began working through the cans to find the one that I needed, moving those that I had checked and discarded to the side. The stack got lower and lower and there was still no sign, and then finally I found the can with a QR code on it next to the barcode. Smiling, I left it lying code side up and reached into my pocket for the phone. I must only have looked away for a fraction of a second, but when I looked back to the can, it was being picked up by another shopper. She was a lady, maybe in her early 60s, and she was placing the can in her shopping trolley. Excuse me, I said politely as I could. "That's my can." She ignored me. Making an effort to keep my tone civil, I picked up a can at random and said, "Look, lady, take this one instead. In fact, take all of them and I'll pay for them using my phone. How about that?" I was trying to smile, trying to be Mr. Reasonable, but she just wasn't getting it. She narrowed her eyes and said in a quiet, determined voice, "No." I threw my hands in the air. I had had enough. "Well, fine in that case," I said. "I'll just take it from you." I wasn't going to hurt her in any way. I mean, I wouldn't need to. I was a young man and she was an older lady. I reached out for the can in her trolley with the QR code. She reached into her bag and took out a small canister, pointed it at my face and sprayed a fine mist into my eyes. They began to burn. Pain shot straight through to my brain. My legs crumpled and I fell to my knees, where I stayed with my hands held over my eyes, gasping. This must have only lasted for a minute or so, but it felt much longer before I felt capable of opening my eyes. They still felt red raw and my vision was badly blurred, but I could make out the uniform of the store guard who was standing in front of me. He told me to get out of there before he called the cops. I managed to get to my feet and staggered from the store. There was no sign of the lady who had sprayed me or the can of cat food that I needed. She was probably already back at home spooning out processed mush from the can to her cat and telling it how she had shown a rude young man not to mess with her. I wiped snot and tears from my face and looked at the phone. The balance was still close to 10 grand, but the shine had been taken off that by my failure in the store. I didn't know for sure how much I would have won, but I could have been tens of thousands of dollars richer. Serious money. And I had let it slip through my grasp. I stood there, dabbing at my eyes with the corner of a sleeve while I waited for the next message. I would not mess it up this time, I vowed. My chance to make good arrived a few minutes later. The new message read, "A taxi is about to pull up next to you and let its passenger out. You will find a QR code on the back if you're quick enough." I frantically scanned the street, and there it was. A taxi slowing to a halt a couple of dozen feet away from me. The door opened, and a scarred cheek climbed out. He didn't look at me as I set off at a sprint towards the taxi. Already, 2 other men were closing in on it from different directions. I increased my pace and pushed past the first man who thought he was going to get in the taxi. He shouted after me and I blanked him. The second man was reaching for the door handle. I came up behind him and tapped him on the shoulder. He turned around to look at me. "Hey, you dropped your wallet," I lied. And he looked at the ground long enough for me to barge past him and get into the taxi. I closed the door and told the driver to take me to the railway station. It was the first location that sprung to mind. I could have asked him to take me to the airport or the best restaurant in town. Anywhere would do as long as it gave me time to find the QR code that Scarcheek had left. As the taxi pulled away, I started to search the back seat. When I couldn't find anything, I turned my attention to the floor, which is where I found the QR code stuck onto a slip of paper. I scanned it with the phone and my spirits soared. The balance was now a cool $50,000, give or take a few dollars. "Yes," I exclaimed and sat back and enjoyed the rest of the ride. When we had arrived, I paid using the phone, got out by the taxi rank in front of the impressive old facade of the railway station, and set off walking back towards the city center. There was no way that I was going to leave town while the game was still paying out money. I was waiting at a crossing when a passing police car slowed down. I caught a glance at the cop in the passenger seat and thought that he was maybe looking at me suspiciously. I told myself that I was being paranoid and stepped out into the road as the light had changed. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the police car doing a U-turn, and by the time that I had made the sidewalk, they were pulling up alongside me. And the cop in the passenger seat rolled down his window and told me that he wanted a word. He did not call me sir. Now, though I had had plenty of brushes with the law, I did not have a criminal record and I wasn't wanted for any offenses. So all I needed to do was play it cool and then I could go on my way and get back to the game. I smiled pleasantly and called him officer and asked him how I could help. He looked like he was on a donut diet that had left him wide around the middle, and he huffed as he maneuvered himself out of the car. He hitched up his uniform trousers, scowled and encroached on my personal space. His breath stank, and it was a struggle to keep my pleasant, law-abiding citizen smile on my face, as he told me that an individual matching my description had been reported acting suspiciously in connection with a number of incidents. I listened politely while thinking about the bar and the briefcase. Cat food lady had already dispensed her own justice, so I doubted that was a part of the mix. His partner was still sitting in the car and getting busy with a toothpick. The cop outside then told me to empty my pockets. Reluctantly, I did. My wallet had my ID and a few dollars in it, but nothing else. I also took out my old, useless phone. The cop put that on the roof of the patrol car while he went through my wallet. The only thing that was left in my pockets was the new phone that I had been given to play the game with. Now, I really didn't want to hand that over, but the cop was giving me a filthy look, asking me what else that I had on me and suggesting a trip to the station for a full body search. And that gross prospect made me take out the slim and sleek phone and hand it over. He put it next to my old phone on the roof of the car and then got on the radio to do a check on my ID. I kept smiling, kept trying not to inflame the situation, but there was a problem. I remembered what Scarcheek had said in the bar about keeping the phone on me at all times, how there would be consequences if I did not. I watched in horror as that threat came true. The balance was going down. From just shy of $50,000, it was already down to $45,000, and the numbers kept descending. The screen showed 44,000 and then 43. At this rate, it would be back down to 0 in minutes. I shifted uncomfortably on my feet. The cop was taking his sweet time checking me out, and his partner was studying something that he had found in between his molars. And all the while, my winnings were falling off a cliff. The balance was heading for 30 grand now. The way that I saw it, I could either be a fugitive or broke. So I made my choice. I grabbed the game phone and started running. I looked down at the screen and it was down to 26,000, but it was holding steady now. I clutched the phone tight against my chest and ran on. I didn't know where I was going. I ignored the wail of the siren. I just kept my head down and put one foot in front of the other. I kept to side streets hoping that I was out of sight of CCTV and wished once again that I wasn't so unfit. The pain in my chest had returned and every breath burned. I probably hadn't even covered a mile when I was forced to stagger to a halt. I seemed to have lost the cops and stood there with my hands on my knees, feeling seriously grim from the exertion. As I recovered, I told myself that I had nothing to worry about. I was hardly one of the country's most wanted. At worst, I was a suspected thief. The police had better things to do than keep chasing after me. I mean, there were a lot of donuts out there that needed eating. I founded a bench and I collapsed onto it. Another look at the phone told me that the balance had not fallen further. I patted the phone, feeling relieved. Before I could put it back in my pocket, a new message had pinged. It read, "Look up. There is a derelict apartment block in sight, and go to apartment 14. I looked up from the phone. I couldn't see anything in front of me, so I got to my feet and turned slowly in a circle, scanning the close horizon. And there it was, a high-rise with every window boarded up. Feeling brighter, I set off walking. This was my opportunity to get the balance back up. On the way to the apartment block, I passed closed-down shops and cars with darkened windows and music blaring out. A sound, which I hoped was a car backfiring, made me flinch. A dog straining against its leash in a yard I passed had barked furiously. It reminded me of the areas that I had lived in for most of my adult life and made me even more determined to take the opportunity the game was offering me. There was no way that I ever wanted to live somewhere like this again. I crossed the street and walked up to the apartment block. The entrance had been boarded up at some point, but the wood was now hanging loose. I squeezed through and found myself in a filthy lobby, watched by a rat that was not in the least bit bothered by my presence. I went looking for number 14. I found it at the far end of a narrow hallway. The door to the apartment was open. I hesitated. I told myself it could have been left open when the occupant had moved out. Or maybe the organizers of the game had left it open after placing the QR code inside for me to find. Neither was a problem, I decided, and so I carried on inside. The apartment was empty. It looked like it had been stripped of all possessions. The internal doors stood open and there was a small bathroom to my left, a narrow kitchen facing it. There was another room a few paces along on my right, and I could hear someone muttering obscenities inside. It was a man, and he did not sound like he was having a good day from the trail of cussing that he was leaving in his wake. well, I was probably about to make it worse. I couldn't think of any reason why anybody else would be here in this apartment at this moment in time, unless they were also playing the game. And backing off and leaving them to find the QR code and the money that went with it was not an option as far as I was concerned. I went into the room to confront my competitor. He was wiry, middle-aged, and wore a short-sleeved bright red shirt with dark sweat patches under his armpits. His bloodshot eyes were fixed on me. I glared at him and said in the meanest voice that I could muster, "You're going to leave now or I'm going to break every bone in your body." It was an empty threat, one that I couldn't have carried out, but he didn't have to know that. And it seemed that my bluff was working. He was squirming as he said, "Oh, come on, man, give me a break. I mean, we're both after the same thing, right?" I said nothing. He reached into a pocket, took out a slim and sleek phone and showed it to me like it was his ID. "See, man, I'm playing the game. Let's team up and find this blasted QR code." The words were barely out of his mouth when his entire body tensed. He stared at the phone in his hand, and his eyes grew wide with fear. And then he started to scream. His entire body spasmed as he cried out, but his eyes were still locked on the phone gripped tightly in his hand. I saw with horror that the skin of his hand around the phone was darkening, and smoke was rising from it. The acrid smell of burning flesh drifted towards me. I gagged and put my hand over my mouth. My thoughts flashed back to the bar and Scar Cheek's warning about not telling anybody that you're in the game. I hadn't for 1 minute imagined this would be the consequence. I watched as the man's head fell back and he crumpled to the floor. He wasn't screaming anymore. His mouth was closed and his eyes stared blindly up at the ceiling. I had never seen a dead person before, but I knew that I was looking at a corpse. The phone had melted into the hideously charred flesh of his hand, and the stench of this and of death itself made me turn and run from the room. I wasn't thinking about the QR code or the money. I just had to get out, somewhere into fresh air. When I did and had managed to stagger back across the road, I doubled up and emptied the contents of my stomach onto the sidewalk. I stumbled away from the mess that I had made and sat in the doorway of a derelict liquor store. I had felt like I was in a strange yet exhilarating game up to that point, but now things had crossed a line and I was in a much darker place. A man had been murdered in cold blood because he had broken one of the rules. I hugged myself and wondered how they had known the man had told me that he was playing the game. The answer came to me straight away. The phones. They gave the company our locations. They must have been transmitting our conversations as well. And then they had used one of the phones as a weapon to kill the rule breaker. I took my phone out of my pocket. There was no way that I was going to end up like that poor soul in apartment 14. I put the phone down and moved it further away from myself with the tip of my shoe. And once again, the balance showing on the screen began to spiral. It was already down to 20K. I felt punch drunk. I was scared to pick the phone up, but if I didn't, I would lose all my money. The balance was down to 15,000, 10,000 now. It was hemorrhaging money at a terrifying speed. I gave in and I picked up the phone and the balance had stopped falling. I had $3,000 left. 3,000 lousy dollars. "Okay," I said, figuring that the company could hear me. "You got your claws well and truly into me. Now give me a chance to win some more money." I stared at the screen, willing a message to appear, but there was nothing. I sighed, picked myself up, and trudged away. The long summer day dragged on. I called into a store and bought a 6-pack of beer and I drank it as I paced the streets. I checked the screen every few minutes for a message, even though I would have heard it if one had come in, and there was still nothing. It had been over an hour now and I wondered if the company had given up on me. Perhaps it was a case of 2 strikes and you're out, though Scar Cheek hadn't mentioned that in the bar back when he had been explaining how the game worked. I was fretting about this when my phone finally pinged. The message read, "Walk straight on. There's a patch of waste ground where you'll find a QR code buried beneath a mound of earth." I didn't like the sound of that one bit, but I had taken a serious financial hit, so I put my misgivings to one side and followed the instructions in the message. I found the waste ground next to the shell of a burnt-out building. Dusk was close and shadows bled from the building across the dirt. There was a raised area of loose earth in one corner of the waste ground. My nerves tingling, I went over to it, and I brushed away the top of the dirt with my hands. Repulsion rushed through me when I saw what lay buried there. The dead man's face was gray and mottled beneath these specks of earth that remained. I recognized him straight away. It was my competitor from the abandoned tower block. The company had murdered him, and now they must have brought his corpse here and buried it, all in the name of their increasingly sick game. And now it was clear to me that I needed to search him for a QR code if I wanted to win more money. I'm ashamed to say that I only hesitated for a few minutes before I started to claw away more dirt so that I could rifle through his pockets. They were empty though. I cursed and then crossed another line. I started to pry open his mouth. I was figuring his killers could have hidden the QR code in there. His jaws cracked as I forced them open and I shivered. I was revolted by my actions, but I wasn't going to stop. Once his mouth was open far enough, I peered inside, but I couldn't see anything. Wondering if a slip of paper with a QR code on had been hidden under his clothes, I began to unbutton his shirt, and I found what I was looking for. But the QR code was not on a piece of paper. It had been tattooed onto his skin. The ink of this gruesome body art was still wet and there was no blood, so I assumed it must have been done post-mortem. Hoping that it would scan, I took out the phone and held the screen over the QR code and then checked the balance. I blinked, not believing my own eyes, and I focused again on the figures showing on the screen. The balance was now $500,000. Grinning from ear to ear, I got out of there before anybody saw me. I was feeling elated and I wanted to book myself into a 5-star hotel and drink champagne to celebrate. After that, I would jet off to somewhere that I could make a new life. I could afford to do that now and have change to spare. But as I walked the city streets, I realized that it was not going to be that simple. I had $500,000 in the account showing on the phone, but I could only spend the contactless limit. And no matter how many times I tapped and swiped, I couldn't get to a screen showing the bank account number or any of the other details that I would need to make significant purchases. I was rich, but most of my riches were out of reach. I was frustrated and furious in equal measures, until an idea came to me. I held up the phone and said, "Look, I know that you can hear me, so listen up. I've had a swallowed time playing your game, but I would like to cash out now." I had no idea if this would work. All the company had displayed so far was merciless efficiency, but it was worth trying. I received a reply as the sun finally dipped over the horizon. The message read, "Wait where you are." It felt like a result to me. It was certainly better than being fried by a mobile phone as punishment for wanting out of the game. A short while later, a car pulled up alongside me. A back door opened and I could see Scar Cheek inside gesturing for me to get in. The smile on his face made my skin crawl, but I got in anyway. I didn't see that I had any other choice. Neither of us spoke as the car cut through the city. Darkness had fallen, and though it was a warm summer's night, I started to feel very cold. It wasn't the air conditioning in the car, it was the fear of the unknown had gotten into my bones. There was no comfort in the lights of passing cars or the glow from the shops, the bars and restaurants that lined the streets. I had no idea what waited for me at the end of this journey, and it was too late for me to back out. It had been for a long time. If only I hadn't picked up that coin. I was thinking this as the car descended into a basement car park. It parked up by an elevator and Scar Cheek got out first and I followed him into the elevator. The bulbous eye of a security camera stared down at me from one corner of the elevator as it rose silently. When the doors opened up, Scar Cheek said, "You're flying solo now, bud." I stepped out of the elevator and into another world. A marble floor reached out across a vast, subtly lit open-plan room. Oil paintings hung on the wood-paneled walls. I recognized one of the paintings. It was a famous masterpiece, and I knew if it was the original, it would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Something told me that whoever lived here would not own copies or fakes. Further into the room, there were armchairs and a table that looked like they belonged in a 17th century European palace. There was a decanter on the table as well as a couple of glasses that sparkled like jewels. Deciding that the owner could spare a shot of liquor, I went to pour myself a drink. The decanter held whiskey. It was smooth, going down, and it had a wonderful kick. I was pouring myself a second generous measure when I realized that I wasn't alone. A man was standing by the elevator. He was observing me silently. I lifted the glass to my lips and took another drink to try and soothe my nerves. He moved towards me. As he came closer, I could see that the skin on his face looked strange. I had read a news feature about billionaires obsessed with preserving their youth and seen photographs of them that showed the freak show results. The man now standing a few feet away from me did look like he had been trying to subvert nature. His skin looked far too smooth and tight, and there wasn't a single blemish or line on his face. His hair was luxurious. There was not an ounce of excess fat on his lean frame. And when he smiled at me, his teeth were perfectly white and straight. The oil painting might have been an original, but he was anything but that. Still smiling his manufactured smile at me, he said, "The company started the game as an amusing diversion. The players usually disappoint, but you have shown promise by searching a fresh corpse. So I would like to offer you the chance to work for the company in an executive position. You would be rich and powerful, a member of the elite." "What if I say no?" I asked. He shrugged. "Then you will be provided with control of the account and spend your winnings as you wish." If somebody had told me that I would have $500,000 to my name just a few hours before, I would have taken the money and ran. But I was tempted by the offer of a job with the company. If I took it, I would never have to worry about money again. I would have people serving me, a private jet, all the trappings of wealth. I was in. I told him I accept. He showed more of his enhanced smile. "You have made the right choice," he said. "There is just one formality that needs to be completed. My father is the current chairman of the company, and he will need to approve your employment." I had thought that I was already speaking to the top dog, but this extra step didn't seem like a big deal to me. "Sure," I said. "Is there an interview or what?" The smile grew even wider before he replied. "No, just an informal meeting. You will be taken to his office." And with that, he held out a hand towards the elevator doors. Our business, it seemed, was concluded, and now I had to go and see the main man. Scarcheek was waiting for me in the elevator. He waved me inside, and the elevator started to ascend. It came to a smooth halt, and Scarcheek said with a sneer, "End of the ride, bud." It was typical of the disrespect that he had shown me from our first meeting, and I decided that when I worked for the company, one of my first actions would be getting him fired. No one like him would ever push me around again. Feeling a rush of excitement at this prospect, I stepped out into a small carpeted lobby. There was a wooden door at the far side with a brass plaque on it reading, Chairman. The lobby smelt musty and I noticed the carpet was peeling up at the edges. I thought that this was strange. It was a long way from the luxury that I had just seen. I told myself not to sweat the details. High flyers saw the bigger picture, and I was going to be one of those now. I took a deep breath and I knocked on the door. There was no response at first. As I waited for someone to tell me to come in, a bug crawled out from a gap between the carpet and the skirting board. It scuttled towards the door and slipped beneath it. I knocked again. There was still no answer. The old me would have given up, but the new me turned the door handle and found it was not locked and let myself in. I found myself in a strange, disorienting place. Gloom enveloped me. The musty smell that I had first noticed in the lobby was a thick, nauseating presence that I could feel dust clogging my throat. I put a hand over my mouth and nose, trying to filter out the dirt and the stench as I took small, hesitant breaths. My eyes were adapting to the gloom, and I could make out the ornate wooden frame of a painting on a wall nearby. Layers of spider webs and dust clung to the frame and formed a layer over the painting itself, obscuring the canvas. I wiped my free hand over the gross layer and could just about make out a portrait of a finely dressed man with a curling mustache and beard. There was a plaque at the base of the painting with raised letters telling me this gentleman had been the chairman of the company from 1810 to 1824. I tried to imagine what he would make of the company's sick endeavors 200 years down the line. As I moved forwards, I saw there were more portraits hanging along the walls. They were a lineup of the figures who had led the company over the years. The last painting showed a man with slicked back hair wearing a gray double-breasted suit. His reign as chairman had a starting date of 1984 but no end date, indicating that he had not yet met his maker in the great boardroom in the sky. Assuming that this was the father of the nauseating man that I had encountered earlier, I continued to the end of the hallway. It led to a room lit by candlelight. The carpet here seemed to be moving. I realized with a jolt of disgust that this was an illusion caused by hundreds of bugs which were crawling across the floor. And then I recoiled in horror when I saw the human remains among the writhing mass of insects. There was a hand on which bone was exposed between scraps of flesh, a face from which the skin had been stripped, two dark voids where the eyes had been. Bile rose into the back of my throat as I realized that the bugs were consuming the remains. And then I saw the corpse's other hand was clutching something. I moved closer and looked at the object clasped in the finger bones. The phone was slim and sleek. Whoever this person had been, they had been caught up in the game as well. I had no idea what they had done to earn this fate, but it was too late for anyone to help them now, and besides, I had an appointment to keep. I moved past the ravaged form. A little way further into the room, the bugs thinned out, and I found myself wading through coins and banknotes. They were scattered everywhere. There was so much money within easy reach, and I wasn't just ankle-deep in cash. There were jewels in among the currency, and gold bars. I picked one up and whistled under my breath. It felt good. I was holding the gold bar up to take a closer look and wondering how much it was worth when I heard somebody say in a hoarse voice, "That is mine." I froze. I looked up. There was a figure standing in front of me. I had seen his portrait, painted when he had become chairman of the company decades before, and I could still recognize traces of the successful, proud businessman that he had been. But only traces, because the thing that stood before me was a travesty. It was a monstrous distortion of a human. The chairman stood more than 7 feet tall and was hideously emaciated. Its deathly pale skin clung tight to the bone beneath. Strands of hair were slicked down over the sliver of scalp covering its skull, and I could see the line of each rib through the torn rags of a gray double-breasted suit. Its lips parted, showing yellowed teeth set into shriveled gums, and it spoke again. Every word was sharp with anger. "It is mine, my fortune, all of it, and you have come to steal it from me." "No," I managed to say. "Your son sent me. He said that I could speak to you about working for the company." The chairman's dark eyes narrowed and it growled. "He lied to you. He wants my wealth as well and sends others to try and steal it. I'll tell you what I told the last man he sent. All thieves must die." And with this, the chairman began to stagger towards me. Its fingers reached out for my throat. I was going to die at its hands, I knew. Bugs would swarm over me as they had done over its last victim. They would eat my skin, the soft flesh of my eyes. "No," I cried out. I couldn't let that happen. I lashed out blindly with the gold bar. The chairman howled in pain and spiraled away. I stood there gasping and watched as it collapsed. A gash had opened up in the side of its head where I had struck it with the gold bar. "I've killed it," I thought. I dropped the bar and felt lightheaded with relief. A good feeling which was lost when I saw the chairman's son and Scar Cheek walking towards me. "A fascinating listen," the chairman's son said with a smug grin on his fake face. Anger flared inside me. I took the phone out of my pocket and threw it to the ground. I had had enough of being tracked and of being treated like dirt. "You set me up," I yelled at him. He laughed at this and said, "Oh, it's only a game." I gritted my teeth and replied, "And what about the $500,000 I earned?" "You don't get a dime. It's my money, all mine." The greed that had driven the father insane and created the inhuman creature which lay dead by her feet was clearly already present in the son. The greed and disregard for human life. He turned to Scar Cheek, nodded at me and said, "Dispose of him." Scar Cheek's smile made it clear that this would be a pleasure for him. He stepped towards me and he was armed. I felt sick with fear and regret. I had wasted my life and I was going to die a lonely, brutal death. Scar Cheek raised the barrel and said, "You lose, bud," but he didn't pull the trigger. His eyes grew wide in surprise and he said, "No, you can't be," before he was cut off. The chairman was back on its feet and had Scar Cheek by the throat. I couldn't watch as it began to squeeze, and when I could bear to look, Scar Cheek lay on the ground, his eyes bulged from his face. Unlike the chairman, he wouldn't be getting up again. The chairman's son hadn't tried to help Scar Cheek. He was trying to sneak out of the office unseen. But the chairman leapt on him, grabbed the back of his scalp, and buried his face into the coins and notes and jewels and gold. These were the final things the son would have seen. He was in the last of his death throes as I ran from the room. I could hear bugs crunch underfoot. I raced past the portraits, through the door and into the elevator. As it descended, I expected it to come to a halt at any moment. For me to be called back for a meeting with the chairman from which there would be no escape. This time. but the elevator doors opened in the basement. I hotwired the car waiting there and crashed through the barriers. I was out and speeding away. But I had no money. The $500,000 was history. Even the few bucks that I had arrived in the city with was lost because the cops still had my wallet. Well, I was fine with that. I had survived, and I hadn't left the chairman's office completely empty-handed. I reached into the pocket where the phone had been until I had dumped it. The diamond that I had picked up on the way out and put in there was small but perfectly formed. I had no idea how I was going to spend it, but I would find a way and then see where chance took me next.